the Cornish coast, the place where Britain dips its toe into the Atlantic. A place to work and to relax, but also the backdrop to some of our greatest literature.
Hello, I'm Chris Packham, and for the next half an hour, I'm going to be celebrating some of the very best books set in this wonderful part of the world.
I'll be finding out what the phrase cliffhanger really means. Going up the creek to do some literary bird watching.
I don't mind sketching a heron myself. They're obliging, they sit nice and still.
And going underground in search of a popular classic.
Whatever you say about the guy, he's profiting from absolute underground subterranean slavery. So join me here in Cornwall for the books that made Britain.
I'm starting in one of the most beautiful parts of North Cornwall, the coast around St Juliot. The young Thomas Hardy came here in 1870 to restore the hamlet's run-down church. He was an architect, but also a budding author. Emma Gifford, his future wife, was sister-in-law to the vicar and staying at the rectory. It's now a place of literary pilgrimage, pretty much unchanged since those days, now a thriving B&B with some lovely gardens.
Look at that. And they say, you know, that Hardy would sit here, gazing out over these fields, over this landscape. And it was that, and his love for Emma, which gave him his inspiration for one of the early novels, A Pair of Blue Eyes.
The book's heroine, Elfriede, based on the young Emma, has two suitors competing for her affections.
In one memorable scene, one of them, Henry Knight, loses his hat when it's blown over the cliff in the wind.
Knight goes after it and slips down the cliff.
In the scene that quite literally gave us the term cliffhanger, Knight is left hanging hundreds of feet above the sea.
Staring at the rock, he finds himself eye to eye with a marine fossil called a trilobite.
It's an ancient marine creature with a remarkable set of eyes. And Hardy writes, separated by millions of years in their lives, Knight and this underling seem to have met in their place of death. Oh.
The book goes on. Time opened up like a fan before him. He saw himself at one extremity of the years, face to face with the beginning and all the intermediate years simultaneously. It's a key scene in Victorian literature. I found out more from Professor Nick Groom of Exeter University.
It is literally the cliffhanger. And so we have Henry Knight hanging, dangling from a precipice, completely suspended in space. And so when Henry Knight's life flashes before him when he's on the edge of the cliff, it's not his own personal experiences, it's actually the evolution of the human race. And so he has visions of dinosaurs, for example, and you get this sort of sense that the land that we're standing on is like a... It's full of this ancient history.
Seems a little bit strange. He's there hanging moments from the end of his life, and yet he pauses to contemplate the Earth's geological history and our part in it.
Well, yes, but that's a sublime moment because it emphasises the insignificance. It emphasises the fact that humans are a mere scratch on this particular surface.
But Hardy's Cornish story doesn't end with his church restoration or the publication of the novel 2 years later. In 1912, Emma died. The couple had drifted apart. Emma's death provoked in Hardy an astonishing series of love lyrics.
Both Hardy and Emma are remembered in this wonderful modern etched glass window. And there are familiar scenes here for Hardy acolytes, but look at this one. Here's Emma on top of the cliff at Beanie riding her pony. And all of these are mentioned in Hardy's love lyrics.
Hardy returned frequently to Beanie Cliff, bringing memories of joy and pain. Now we remember the lost with a bench and a view.
I'm going to ask you to indulge me now, a little ornithological digression, because this bench is here in memory of a man called Dick Treleaven, a great Cornishman and a great birdwatcher. You know, it was him that identified in the last century that our peregrine falcons were in real trouble due to pesticide poisoning. And this is a lovely testament to what he achieved, but an even greater testament is out here, because on this stretch of coast now there are no fewer than 20 pairs of peregrine falcons. What about that?
There's something about the coast that always brings out strong emotions. The sense of the vast ocean and Beetling Cliff being greater than a mere man. My next literary visitor to Cornwall found not just his attitude to religion changed by the experience, but his whole world turned upside down. This is the landscape near Zena, an ancient one. Some field systems are Bronze Age, little changed over thousands of years. The country is strewn with granite outcrops, some shaped by man, perhaps for religious purposes.
This extraordinary Celtic landscape was an absolute magnet for one of Britain's greatest novelists, D.H. Lawrence. And he came here in 1916, partly to escape the furore that surrounded his newly banned book, The Rainbow, and partly to escape the First World War. But he arrived with his German wife, Frida, and the war was on, so the natives were suspicious.
He stayed briefly here at this pub in Zena before moving to a lonely cottage nearby. His experiences are recounted in the Nightmare chapter of his novel Kangaroo. The Celtic pre-Christian world of this granite landscape inspired thoughts of a new way of being in the intensely religious Lawrence. In one key passage, the hero, Richard Summers, a portrait of Lawrence, feels that spirit.
The spirit of the ancient pre-Christian world, which lingers still in the truly Celtic places, he could feel it invade him in the savage dusk, making him savage too, and at the same time strangely sensitive and subtle. He goes on. He no longer wanted to struggle consciously along, a thought adventurer. He preferred to drift into a sort of blood darkness, to take up in his veins again the savage vibrations that still lingered round the secret rocks.
Heady stuff. Dr. Jane Costin, an expert on Lawrence in Cornwall, told me why granite was so important in shaping his beliefs.
Granite, which, as he describes, has a life and sparkle all of its own, can act as a repository of the essence of previous generations, which means that through his own blood consciousness, he can then access this other ideas of spirituality, because he had this strong belief in the conflict between blood consciousness and mental consciousness. Things you've been taught and things that are instinctive, and it's the blood conscious, the instinctive things that he feels is more important.
Whilst Lawrence was bonding well with West Cornwall, his relationship with the locals was falling apart. You see, in 1914, he'd married Frida von Richthofen, a relation of the famous Red Baron. But a German in wartime Cornwall, it was never going to end well. Everything the Lawrences did fell suspect. Tarring the cottage chimney was seen as a signal to enemy submarines.
In the book, Lawrence recounts that some of the locals were spying on him, using binoculars, peering over the walls, and eavesdropping on his conversations from behind hedges and walls. What were they like? Maybe the Lawrence's fondness for singing German songs really didn't help matters. Prost!
Whatever the rights and wrongs, the end came. In October 1917, they were expelled from Zena and the county as suspected spies. But there may be a twist to the tale. Jane believes that Lawrence's unconventional religion may have been what really counted against him.
The thing that really was his downfall is that he refused to go to church. And regrettably, it was the vicar of Zena Church behind us that informed the authorities that he thought Lawrence was a spy.
What impact did this banishment have upon Lawrence?
It had a very significant impact on him, and he represses his feelings about his expulsion from Cornwall. And it isn't until he gets to Australia and he writes Kangaroo that all of a sudden all these emotions boil out of him.
Expelled from this Eden, he never settled in England again. At the end of the Nightmare chapter, he describes watching England from the ferry, sinking like a dreary grey coffin into the sea. OK, now it's time for some light relief, because not every visitor to the coast ends up dangling from a cliff or being kicked out as a German spy. Millions come every year just to enjoy themselves, pick up a bucket and spade and chill. This upmarket hotel in Foy has been pulling in tourists in their thousands for decades, but not many of us could knock off part of a children's classic on the hotel writing paper.
The mole had been working very hard all the morning, spring cleaning his little home. First with brooms, then with dusters, then on ladders and steps and chairs, with a brush and a pail of whitewash. That's the start of Kenneth Grahame's Wind in the Willows, first published in 1908, but still enjoyed by millions of children and adults all over the world.
The tale of Ratty, Mole and Badger, later illustrated by Rackham, first saw light of day in a series of letters to Mouse, the affectionate name given to Grahame's son, Alistair.
Hanging in the hotel here, they have copies of the 3 letters that were the germ of the idea for this book, and they make fascinating reading. Just look at this letterhead. Honestly, you don't get letterheads like that anymore, not even at the Ritz.
And that's not all. In the tea garden, they've these splendid willow sculptures of the main characters.
The gentle, home-loving mole, bedecked with spectacles, which is appropriate because these animals are relatively short-sighted, although I'm going to add a couple of highly sensitive vibrissae, or whiskers, which will help it find its food.
The book combines adventure and a gentle pastoral feel of Old England. It has its roots also in the Thames Valley and Loch Fyne, where Grahame had lived. To find clues to its origin here, I went on a tour. In one chapter, the sea rat talks of the little grey sea town I know so well. There, through dark doorways, you look down flights of stone steps, overhung by great pink tufts of valerian and ending in a patch of bright water.
Well, we've got the stone steps. You've got the bright water. Sadly, there's only one tiny piece of valerian there. I know it's not a native species, but it's really good for butterflies.
But to get back to the mammals, to get the full flavour of the Foy River, you need to head up it. The wooded creeks off the river are part inspiration for the wildwood in the book. These woods on steep-sided banks are known as kynances in Cornwall. Mole visits the wood against Rat's advice in an effort to find Badger. Even in summer, the dense canopy shuts out a lot of the light. You can see why a small mole would be spooked.
This is the lair of the weasels, where they stare and whistle at Mole until Ratty turns up with his cudgel and pistols to scare them off. Then Mole trips over Badger's doorstep and they dig around to find the entrance.
The sad fact is, while badgers are doing okay, water rats, moles and weasels would be a rare sight around here, all are in decline.
In Grahame's day, this would have been a working wood. Loads of glades, pre-pesticides. I bet there were clouds of butterflies, but it's still pretty good today. Just look at this. This old log is covered in moss. It's got ferns growing out of it. It's a whole little ecosystem here, absolutely packed with life.
The dense wood means there's little disturbance for the birds on the river.
Little egrets would have been a bird that Grahame would have been very, very unlikely to see. By the turn of the last century, they'd been hunted to extinction across northern Europe because of the plume trade. Thankfully, today, they've made a remarkable comeback. They're breeding down here. Always nice to see.
All in all, when you're done with the birds, it's a great place to sit down and read.
Look at that. Here's a drawing of the wild wood. It could be the very same tree. And what I like about Wind in the Willows is its gentle anthropomorphism. The characters are real, but they're differentiated, and the lush descriptions of the woodland and the riverbank are a perfect introduction to young people when it comes to nature. Can't be beaten. Well, those are my thoughts. What about yours? Let us know using the hashtag #LoveToRead, and then we can all join in with what you're enjoying. Anyway, now, back to the books.
Because for my next classic, I'm on my way to the very western edge of Cornwall. This is Poldark Mine, or more precisely, the Crown's engine houses at Poldark.
This is the backdrop to one of the region's most successful literary and TV adaptations. I'm talking Poldark. Poldark is also a very, very successful novel saga, with the books and the TV feeding off each other's success, in fact fueling it. Now, it was published by Winston Graham at the end of the Second World War, and I've little doubt that Ross's character, one that's up for fair play and radical change, very much tied into the mood of the moment, which was all about repair and restoration.
Graham's combination of gritty history and epic romance produced a brew almost as potent as the arsenic extracted in this old mine labyrinth at Poldark, and its power reaches across the continents. Sally Bell's family were originally from Pendeen, just a mile from here. They moved, like so many, to Australia to work the mines. Poldark, though, might have just pulled her back.
For me, living in Australia, the language of the books allowed me to connect with the landscape of my ancestors. And for any of us who are part of the diaspora, I think that's something that, we tend to sort of feel that need to do that very keenly.
Is it fair to say then that they were instrumental in bringing you back here to Cornwall?
Yeah, they really did. Yeah, I think it's one of those funny things, that sense of need to connect to the landscape and the sense of place is either in you or it's not. I've got cousins, and most of my family thinks I'm mad. I've got the occasional cousin who understands completely because they've been here. They've felt how the land here makes them feel.
Do you think it's fair to say that they are, stereotypically speaking, women's books?
I think they are women's books if you enjoy books where there is a strong female role model. I think, Demelza is a fabulous character. She's a fighter.
Oh, right, OK. But it's also fair to say that they have some quite attractive male characters too.
This is true, Chris. Yes, I think the odd scything and bathing scene doesn't hurt, but, they're books for everyone, and I encourage everyone to read them.
OK, a nice romantic read, but how true a portrait of life as a mine owner? This is Poldark Mine, inland from Poldark. It closed in the 19th century, and it's one of the few places where you can get a glimpse of what it must have been like.
You imagine back in the day when they were climbing maybe several hundred feet of shafts like this on a ladder, and then do an 8 to 10 hour day, and then they did that 7 days a week.
Darryl, the guide, soon fills me in on life underground.
Working conditions were shocking.
Terrible, yeah. You'll see as we go further into the mine that...
What about life expectancy?
32 to 35 years, maybe, if they were lucky. I mean, late 20s, they were burnt out. Hard, yeah.
Not
Cold,
surprised.
with the candle,
Yeah.
by hand.
It's wet and claustrophobic, and I'm not having to swing an axe or a pick.
Seems odd, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can't get your head around it.
Because 7 days a week underground in horrific conditions with appalling safety, with a life expectancy of less than 30. What pleasure could there have been? Why did you bother? just to eat and stay alive so you could go back down the mine the next day.
Eke had an existence, I guess. It was either that or it was the workhouse. Or,
I've gone right off Poldark, actually. They can do what they like with him on TV. He can have a heaving chest, he can rip his shirt off, he can appeal to every lady in the land.
This
but
is
ultimately, what he was, profiting from was this sort of savage cruelty. I've
So
got
that was life at that period of time. That was kind of how it was for everybody, for farming, for fishing. Not
He's
just
got like a
for wine.
velvet jacket and a horse and all the trappings of wealth, and he's exploiting the working man. I've completely Poldark. It's over. Forget it. Never reading another book.
In the 18th century then, a cruel trade, but its passing is still mourned by many in Cornwall. After a 4,000-year history and following a collapse in prices, the last tin mine closed in 1998. Now there's more money to be made writing novels and TV dramas about tin than digging it up. Tourism is the big money spinner now, worth £1.4 billion a year to Cornwall, with Poldark giving the industry a welcome shot in the arm. Many come to Cornwall in search of the places that have inspired their favourite books. Literary tourism is big business, and there's no bigger attraction than the author of my next book that made Britain.
I'm back here in Foy, the literary epicentre of the duchy. And if a duchy can have a queen, then there's really only one contender, Daphne du Maurier.
Du Maurier pretty much is literary Cornwall. A series of classics based here are all bestsellers. She'd come here on a holiday as a child, fallen in love with the place, and settled at Ferryside overlooking the river. Not surprisingly, there's a literary centre and bookshops devoted to Foy's favourite daughter. Nearly all her books are on sale. I wonder how they're doing.
Can I ask you a question? Do these Daphne du Maurier books still sell quite well?
Yeah, I would say we probably order in maybe £3,000 worth every 8 weeks or so.
£3,000 every 8 weeks?
Oh, yes.
Goodness me, they're still top of the bestsellers list.
Absolutely, yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you. Bye.
Bye-bye. What I like about books like Frenchman's Creek is that you open them, you start reading, and you step out of one world and into another.
This is Frenchman's Creek off the Helford River, the setting for a romance in Restoration Cornwall. Aristocrat Lady Donna St. Column is drawn to a secluded creek and meets a dashing French pirate resting from plundering the locals.
Of all the pirates you could meet, this fellow is possibly the most sensitive. When Donna meets him, he's sketching a heron. I don't mind sketching a heron myself. They're obliging, they sit nice and still. But a pirate as an ornithologist? You can't beat that. Honestly.
And a heron obligingly flew in whilst we were filming. Now, it's a romantic book, but full of natural history, echoing to the call of the curlew and whip, whip, whip of the oyster catcher. It's evident Daphne knew her birds as well as the human heart and drew inspiration from the wildlife here. And she also drew much from her visits to this place, Trellawarren. A couple of miles up the river, for centuries it's been home to a Cornish aristocratic family, the Vivians. Daphne was great friends with Lady Clara Vivian. They toured Europe together and she stayed at the house, gradually absorbing the atmosphere.
Holiday with
Victoria Vivian has researched the links between Trellawarren and the novel's stately home, Navron House. The Vivians lost out badly through their support for Charles I in the Civil War.
So from when Daphne first came here in 1930, I think she was entranced by the romance of the royalist Vivian story. The Vivians were staunch royalists and they gave absolutely everything for the cause in the Civil War.
And here he is, Charles I.
Yes, a thank you from Charles II to the Vivians for that support.
Wow.
They would rather have had money. In here we've got a couple of pictures of the royalists, the Vivian royalists. Here's Sir Richard Vivian, the first baronet, and probably more importantly his wife, Mary Bulteel, who was Henrietta Maurier, who was Charles I's wife, one of her ladies in waiting.
It's certainly a very romantic painting. Do you think there's any chance at all given that Daphne would have undoubtedly seen this, that this is the inspiration for Donna?
Well, it would be nice to think so. And Mary Bourketil was certainly a very brave person. She remained with the Queen through a pretty terrifying flight from Cromwell's army. And she's wearing the pearls that were given to her by Henrietta Maria as a thanks for her loyalty. Pearls which we still have now.
And I guess that's the greatness of a true storyteller. To take disparate elements, a creek, a house, and a few paintings, and turn them into a great read.
It is a good read. It's a real page-turner in lots of ways. It's got pirates in it, it's got beautiful women in it, it's got fights and duels, and it's got a sensitive Frenchman who paints birds. But I think 1941, date of publication, is a time when people want to escape from what's happening in London, I think, and what's happening in all of the major cities. The Second World War isn't going very well. People feel utterly embattled on every front. And her escape from London to Cornwall, to this beautiful rural idyll with the river and the oak trees and this peaceful house where her children can play safely, must have been the thing that really gave it a kick from the get-go.
The coast has always been a place of escape, but it's more than just a refuge. It's where land is both created and destroyed, in constant flux. Where new people like du Maurier's pirate, and new ideas arrive and bring change with them. Perhaps that's why it's such a rich and creative place to root stories in. I'm back at Poldark, all set to reveal my favourite of the books that made Britain right here in Cornwall.
So what's it going to be? Thomas Hardy's early love story? A pair of blue eyes? Maybe you fancy that bitter tirade, one chapter of Lawrence's Kangaroo, because he felt so mistreated very close to here. You could go for the romantic fantasy, Frenchman's Creek, although fans of Daphne won't like me using the R word. Ross Poldark, not for me. Not after what he did to all of those people who worked down his mines. So that just leaves me with my favourite, Wind in the Willows, Kenneth Grahame. Now, it's not the best book in the world, but it's undeniably one of the most charming. And at this point, what would typically happen is I would stride off into the sunset and the camel would swoop across me and out over the cliffs, but not on this occasion, because I'm just going to settle down with a good book.